right. Welcome back to Signum Academy. This is Wesley Shantz, and this, I think, is showing up for you. This is Philip Pullman, looking really not very pleased about something. His arms folded, his glare. He used to be a teacher, so I guess he had a pretty good teacher glare. And he is out with a new book right now called Serpentine, or Serpentine. I pronounce it Serpentine, though. A new short story, which, when they added the illustrations, came to a nice, short book length. So they went ahead and published it. It's a bridge. They call it a bridge between the original His Dark Materials and the new Book of Dust. There's kind of an interesting story behind this story as well, where Philip Pullman was asked to help out with a fundraiser, like a charity kind of thing, for the National Theater, which had just done a really amazing production of a play version of His Dark Materials. And so he put up this short story for the auction there. The story is getting published now, mainly because he feels like it offers some insight into what's going on in the new series and how we get from the first one to the second one. But apparently when he wrote it, he didn't know he'd be writing a whole new series about these characters. So it's, or at least that's his story. So anyway, if you're a big Philip Pullman fan like me, definitely worth a look. If none of this makes any sense to you, I apologize, but it's always exciting when Philip Pullman comes out with a new book. And I guess you guys know that the His Dark Materials show is having a second season, so that's great. Okay, enough of that. Let's get back to Clockwork. Okay, so I've got my two copies of the book here. The Spanish version, which has the Peter Bailey illustrations in it, which has their nice descriptions that go with them, all in Spanish though. And the American edition of the book, which has some good pictures of its own, but doesn't have those great captions and descriptions of the illustrations. So we're going to be looking at both a little bit here. But you'll see that whatever edition you've got, it's going to open with this note from the storyteller, actually. So Clockwork, the first thing about it is that it is letting you know that it's a story. It's not jumping right in with Once Upon a Time. Instead, you first get this story about the story, right? Now, the one I just told you about, Serpentine, is, as far as I know, like real. It's a real world story about a real person, Philip Pullman, who wrote this book. Okay, but what's going on in the Clockwork prologue, or as he puts it, a note about clocks, it's a little more complicated than that. He doesn't sign it Philip Pullman. He does say I, and he does sort of pretend that this story took place, in a time, in a place, in the real world. But I don't think we really have to believe that, to enjoy the story. Okay, so it's a little bit more like he's letting us know this is a story, and he wants us to sort of think about what it means to tell a story, if that makes sense. That's what I think is going on in this note about clocks. It's kind of playful, actually. From the very first line, he says, "In the old days, when this story took place, time used to run by clockwork. Real clockwork, I mean, springs and cogwheels and gears and pendulums and so on. When you took it apart, you could see how it worked and how to put it together again. Nowadays, time runs by electricity and vibrating crystals of quartz and goodness knows what else. Right? So he's giving us this kind of contrast. What today time is like. It's this kind of mysterious, instantaneous thing that's hard to understand, versus the old days. Back in the old days, time ran by clockwork. Mechanical pieces that fit together. Okay, so the whole thing is kind of about the way that a story fits together. And the first line in the story goes back to this idea again. Once upon a time, when time ran by clockwork, a strange event took place in a little German town. Actually, it was a series of events, all fitting together like the parts of a clock. And although each person saw a different part, no one saw the whole of it. But here it is, as well as I can tell it. So, again, there's this kind of playful sense that the storyteller thinks this really happened and has gone around finding all the pieces and is putting them together for us. So I don't think the storyteller is exactly the same as Philip Pullman, is what I'm trying to say. I think he's also created this character of the storyteller, the narrator, telling the story. It gets more confusing because, of course, there's actually a storyteller character in the story. But anyway, if any of that is confusing, I'm sorry. Please send me a chat here in the stream, or what's it called? Twitch, in the Twitch stream. Let me help you out. Let me try to explain better. But I find this really, really interesting. Okay, so we've got this story. We've got this German town, so a setting, right? And zooming in even more, it's sort of story starting off in the White Horse Tavern. Right, so a nice place to start a mystery, spooky story, a tavern, right? It's cold, it's snowy outside, it's dark, and inside it's warm. There's cheerful sounds and life and food and drink, and warm fires to sit by, right? So you automatically get this kind of nice cozy feeling, but just outside it's dangerous. The clock is kind of the same way, right? The clock is reliable. You can understand how it works. If you see all the pieces, you know how they fit together, right? But on the other hand, the storyteller points out that if you aren't careful, those pieces of the clock will they can hurt you. They're sharp. They can I think he describes it like a serpent. It can sting you, right? And of course, when you think about time, you think about death. We know this from the alethiometer, and the title. The name of this tavern is the White Horse. Well, famously, death is depicted as riding on a white horse in the book of Revelation, in the Apocalypse, and in the kind of medieval imagination of what death is. It's this thing that comes at any moment, right? Riding a horse. It's fast. It's sudden. It's like a flash of light. That whiteness of the horse, much older than the Christian religion in England, is this petroglyph, a rock art, a kind of drawing on the land itself of a white horse. This is in England. It's very beautiful. If you look at it from the sky, you can see the whole thing. Such a cool way to depict the movement, the life of the animal, the horse animal. So kind of a different take. But anyway, this is what I thought of when I was thinking about the White Horse Tavern, and the setting for this story. Some of the kind of concepts here. But we're told it's a town in Germany, right? So all our characters have these very German names. They're really nice. Fritz is the storyteller character. Right, so he's one of the people that's there in the tavern. He's the reason why a bunch of people are in the taverns, because they want to hear his new story that he's going to tell them. Okay, so along with Fritz, we've got Carl. Carl is the apprentice clockmaker. He's in the tavern, apparently, to get drunk. He just wants to forget about his problems. He wants to be angry and sort of sullen. He's there to drink. All right, so that's Carl. And then there's Gretel. She's the other main character at the start of the story. She's the daughter of the innkeeper. She's serving the drinks. She's taking care of the customers. Right? And in a way, she is the main character, I think, of this story. She might make you think, if you've read La Belle Sauvage, the first in the Book of Dust, the first volume, she might make you think of Malcolm, the boy who works at the Trout Inn. He's the main character of that story. He's kind of, helping his family out by serving drinks and food at their inn or tavern. So Pullman really likes these kind of characters. They show up in a bunch of his other stories, actually, too. His stories for teens or young adults. The White Mercedes, also called The Butterfly Tattoo, or The Broken Bridge is another one, where the main character, in both cases, they work at restaurants, basically. So anyway, that's kind of the setting of the story. These are some of our characters, right? And we have this kind of drama of everyone wants to hear Fritz's new story. So he's a very talented storyteller. He can really grab you with suspense and give you a kind of spooky, feeling, which we really love, right? And he's going to debut his new story tonight at the tavern. Right, so there's that. That's one piece in the Clockwork. The other piece is Carl, and what's going on with Carl is that he is an apprentice. He is supposed to have been making his masterpiece, right? The thing that qualifies him as a master of the craft of clockmaking, which is a figure for the town clock. The town's name is Glockenheim, which means like clock town or clock home or something. So the thing is, Carl has not done it. He hasn't done the work, right? So he's very depressed. He's very down on himself, and he knows he's going to be in trouble when the morning comes and he hasn't got anything to show, right? So that's the other kind of main piece of Clockwork at this point. Now then, we can't forget Gretel. Gretel is sort of moving back and forth between these characters. She isn't sure if she should serve Carl if he's had too much to drink, but Fritz says, "Go ahead. He's fine." So there's her kind of care and concern, which is the other main piece of the story. So then we get into Fritz's story. Right? It's called. He gives a nervous glance at his friend Carl. It's called Clockwork. So he says, I wonder if any of you remember the extraordinary business at the palace a few years ago. They tried to hush it up, but some details came out, and a bizarre mystery it was, too. It seems that Prince Otto had taken his young son Florian hunting, together with an old friend of the royal family, Baron Stelgratz. It was the dead of winter, just like now. So we get very quickly introduced to these other new characters. The prince, his son, and the old, loyal old servant. So this story is, again, it's made like it's supposed to be real, right? It took place in the palace, but the events of the story are quite unbelievable. Okay, so again, we're in this kind of strange world here. A character from Fritz's story, Dr. Calminius of Schatzberg steps out of the story and into the tavern. He shows up at the tavern. So Dr. Calminius is the clockmaker in Fritz's story. He's able to take a dying person and fix them with clockwork, able to bring them back to life, in fact. We saw last time we talked about this, Dr. Calminius is very close to the Mephistopheles figure, the devil figure, who offers something magical, something tempting, and at a price, right? At a high price. So this is the point at which Fritz's story cuts off, and we come back to the world of the tavern and the main story, if you like. He seems astonished to have summoned or conjured up this kind of mad scientist or even devil, demonic figure into the real world. So Fritz apparently leaves his story unfinished, right? Apparently because he's so afraid of Dr. Calminius, he leaves the scene. So now we have this kind of problem, right, of an unfinished story. So there's that. Now it starts to look very similar to Carl's problem. Carl, the clockmaker, who hasn't actually made a clock figure. Right? So Dr. Calminius, like he does, is a problem solver. He offers a solution in the form of a perfect little knight, a figure of a knight with a sharp sword. Okay, and so this is his kind of discussion with Carl. Carl, in this case, looks a lot like the Dr. Faust character, the character who wants something that he shouldn't have, that he maybe can't have, and is willing to pay that very steep price for it. So everyone else has deserted the tavern at this point. It's just Carl and Dr. Calminius talking in the sort of shadows. He says, you know very well what I want. I want a figure for the clock. Something to show for all the time I should have spent in making it. Anything to avoid the shame I'll feel tomorrow. Again, Carl is willing to do anything. He knows that he shouldn't have wasted his time. He should have been making his figure, but he didn't. So he's in a really tough situation here. Again, Dr. Calminius offers him a way out. And this is where the song comes in. If you remember the Flowers of Lapland song that we saw last time. Because the figure of the knight, once it starts moving, will not stop unless it hears that song play. Okay. It loves that little song. So this makes Dr. Calminius now very similar to our storyteller, our narrator character, because he's talking about time being like a clock that you can wind up and you can make things happen. Right? So this idea that you're in control of your own destiny. Now, Carl knows very well that he actually isn't. Right? He's at the mercy of the clockmaker, Dr. Calminius, at the mercy of the town and the people who are going to mock him. Right? Um, but with this little knight figure, Sir Iron Soul, he's called, he thinks he might have a way out. So this is going back a little bit now. What I think is really the most important part about this story is a little line that we hear a couple of times. We hear it in the middle of the story, and we hear it at the end of the story. So in the middle of the story, it comes in during Fritz's story of Prince Otto and young Florian. And we have a literal sense of this phrase, the heart that is given must be kept also. Okay? So Prince Otto, the father, literally gives his heart to his son, Prince Florian. It's a heart transplant. Okay, Dr. Calmenius is the operator, and he takes the heart out and puts it into the little boy, the little prince, who he has also apparently made when the prince was dying before. So there's that. This is one of those things which seems impossible, yet happens in the world of the story. And sure enough, that little prince shows up in the real world, the world of Glockenheim and the tavern. Okay, just in the nick of time, the prince shows up and happens to be singing that song, which stops Sir Iron Soul from attacking whoever he's close to, and saves Gretel's life. So Gretel accidentally activated the Clockwork knight, and the prince accidentally saves her. So we have another kind of breaking into reality from the world of stories, and in this case, a life-saving event. The prince saves Gretel's life. Now, the other half of this, though, the heart that is given must also be kept, comes when Gretel saves the prince in turn. All right, so while she's away trying to get Fritz's side of the story, Carl finds the little prince and thinks that he is also a piece of clockwork, but an even better one than Sir Iron Soul. So he takes the prince, puts him in the clock tower as his own work. Right? He steals something he didn't even really have offered in this case, and he's going to claim it as his work. So Gretel comes back, finds the prince gone, realizes what must have happened, and she goes to rescue the prince from the top of the clock tower. And this is such a lovely moment where she has probably the longest speech in the story. When she finds the prince up there, she kind of pours out her heart. Again, she's very caring, very observant, very clever, and then she simply holds him and keeps him warm because she feels how cold he is. She wants to keep him warm. And so when the next day comes and the people are all gathered in the square and looking up to see what has Carl come up with for his masterpiece, instead of one figure, it's two. It's the two sleeping children. And we see from the audience point of view, we see them wake up and look down in astonishment and wonder. And pretty soon the innkeeper realizes that's not a clockwork at all. That's his daughter, Gretel. And they wonder, who's this other kid? Because the prince has come to life. He has become real because of Gretel's giving of her heart. Again, not literal this time, but metaphorical, or sort of a symbol of her love. So warming him up, keeping him alive, physically, but also emotionally, and with her love and her care. So I think I'll go back a few slides then. Back up here. This is one of those images from Peter Bailey's version of this. It's Gretel in the tavern. I'm trying to find it here. Sorry. Oh, here we go. Okay. She was pure of heart, is basically, and warm of heart. She had a heart of gold. In Spanish, it says. So she's associated here with the fire, with the light, right? That bright candle there, and she. It tells us that she very often found that kind people are taken advantage of because the world is cruel. Right? So there's this kind of I think that's referring to Carl, maybe, people who take advantage of other people's kindness. So it turns out, it works out in the end for Gretel, right? I think the message of the story is really clear. Again, the heart that is given must be kept also. It's not about, it's not about wasting your time and spinning a story that you don't know the ending to, like Fritz does or like Carl does, right? It's about looking around, being observant, seeing what's going on, and realizing that if you give of yourself and give care, yes, it might be painful, it might be dangerous to open yourself up and be vulnerable in that way, but that's the only way that this kind of cruel world can be made a place of warmth, of welcome, of light. That is, I think, what Pullman is getting across with this story. There's also the question of Dr. Comenius. He sort of disappears. He seems like sort of a dark version of the storyteller, of the one who offers something apparently great and just what you need, but asks too high a price, right? And it does cost Carl his life. It costs Prince Otto his life because he didn't really understand, right? There might have been another way to save his son. He might not have had to literally take his heart out, and do that sort of operation. Maybe a story operation, right? A loving, kind of caring operation could have worked. So it's a super intricate, well-told story. Again, Philip Pullman calls this his most perfect story, and it's maybe his favorite, the thing he wants to be remembered for. It is quite short, although it's not as short as Serpentine. I think it is a better story, probably, than Serpentine. And I highly, highly recommend it to you guys. If you're at all interested in fairy tales, in sort of spooky stories, this is one of the best ones there is, I think. Now, with that said, we're going to look next time. Next time is the Scarecrow and his servant. I think that's what's up next. Yeah. And this will be our book for November. So we'll meet again the first Monday of November. You guys have lots of time, I hope, to read or listen to these books. We're going to be looking at the Scarecrow and his servant, and again, we'll start with sort of the background, the sources, some kinds of things to watch for as you're reading, and then our second meeting, that would be the third Monday of November. We'll dig into the story more, okay, and we'll look at what's going on with it. So I hope that you guys are able to join me again for that. Again, I really love getting to talk about Philip Pullman all the time here. But if you guys have other authors, other books and stories and fairy tales and that kind of thing that you would particularly like for the new year, when we come into January, we're going to need maybe a new topic for next year. Do send them in, suggest things. If you have questions, feel free to send them in too and ask. I'll certainly come up with something, but I'd love some input and some ideas too. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys joining me. I hope that you're enjoying reading and taking care of yourselves out there. Hope you've got some good Halloween ideas. And if you need a costume for Halloween, maybe you'll get a good idea from reading Clockwork, Scarecrow and His Servant, and maybe even The Firework Maker's Daughter if you're a little ahead of the game here. So, happy Halloween, everybody. Happy October, happy fall. And I'll let you all go. I'll see you again start of November.